Well, we are right towards the tail end, the last 2 weeks of this series we've been doing over the summer called Get Out of the Boat. And we've been talking about what it means to live our life in faith, to take steps in faith versus living in fear. And that we can't live in both. You can't coexist in both. You can't act in faith, but also be controlled by fear. Now, every time you act in faith, you actually have to step through a little fear. You have to. You're going to always feel both, but to really live in faith, it comes with walking through that and stepping out of the fear. And so we're towards the tail end of it. We've looked at all the different patriarchs of the book of Genesis, and we're finishing up with Joseph. We're in the middle of Joseph's life right now, and we're going to see Joseph and how he has the faith to forgive. Joseph is full of faith, and he is able to forgive his brothers. If you were with us last week, I'll just kind of catch up to speed with where we're at. Last week, Joseph's brothers, if you remember, they totally dysfunctional family. Dad shows absolute favoritism to Joseph. The brothers hate Joseph, and they actually literally hate him so much they sell him into slavery in Egypt. And he ends up in Egypt, and he is a slave, but God continues to be with him. And as a result, everything Joseph does gets blessed. And the master puts him in charge of more and more and more. And eventually the master's wife starts coming on to Joseph. And Joseph shows righteousness and character and integrity, and he flees from her, but he's rewarded with that by being put into prison. And so Joseph's in prison. He's there for a while. He ends up being in there for a little over 2 years, probably about 2.5 years. And then finally, a cupbearer to the Pharaoh, Joseph had interpreted his dream, and the cupbearer said he'd remember Joseph when he did that, but the cupbearer didn't, and he didn't help Joseph get out of prison. So finally, Pharaoh has a dream, and the cupbearer says, hey, you got to meet this guy named Joseph that's in prison, and hopefully he can interpret your dream. And so Joseph interprets the Pharaoh's dream, and he gets out of prison. And the dream was basically that there was going to be 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine, and that the Pharaoh needed to set up a system to prepare for that. Well, Pharaoh ends up putting Joseph in charge of all of that. And so Joseph is second in the command of Egypt, and that's where we pick up with Joseph. And today we're going to see that Joseph has the faith to forgive. So if you've got your Bibles and you want to open them, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 42, and we're going to be cruising through, I think it said 45, but we're actually going to be cruising through all the way through 46. So we're covering 5 chapters today. So, I know some of you are like, okay, I had lunch plans. I'm just going to cancel them. No, we're going to get through it, okay? So chapter 42 starts off actually in the promised land, Canaan, at Jacob, Joseph's father's home. And they're experiencing the famine just like everyone else. It's spread all past Egypt into the rest of the land. So Jacob sends the 10 brothers that sold Joseph into slavery, he sends them back to buy food. Now at this point, Jacob has a younger son, Benjamin, by Rachel, the same wife that bore him Joseph, the one that is his favorite. Rachel's the wife that he truly loves. Of these 4 wives that he has, the others out of convenience. So Benjamin's his favorite. Now, Benjamin's still a boy, so a younger boy, probably about 12, 13. So it makes sense that he didn't send him. But definitely we see that Benjamin is his favorite, and he sends these men to Egypt to try to get some more food. Well, when they arrive, Joseph recognizes it's his brothers, but they don't recognize him. They have to go appear before Joseph in order to buy the food because Joseph's in charge of all of that. And they don't recognize Joseph, which makes sense when you really think about it. Been 20 years, 17 years old versus 37, a little bit different. It's probably more like 38 or 39, so a little over 20 years at this point. He would have before dressed and wore his hair like the Canaanite people out in the desert, which would have been bearded and, a little bit different in his clothing. Now he probably has no beard, haircut. He's wearing the best of clothes because he's second in command of Egypt, plus Egyptian clothes, plus he speaks Egyptian. And chances are, if you sold your brother into slavery, you wouldn't expect him to be second in command of the big country, right? So it makes sense that they don't recognize him, okay? And we pick up with Joseph. When he meets them, he accuses them of being spies, okay? So we're going to pick up in chapter 42, verse 13, and see what we find out. They answer his accusation. They say, "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, the one who is, and one is no more," speaking about Joseph. But Joseph said to them, "It is as I said to you, you are spies. By this you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you and let him bring your brother while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you. Or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." And he put them all together in custody for 3 days. Okay, so he puts them in custody to have them think this through. Like, hey, we're going to do this? We're going to go for this? They're in custody. 3 days later, he comes back and he says, "Okay, hey, I fear God, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep one of you, and the rest of you are going to go back and you're going to retrieve your brother." And he sends them home with a bunch of the food that they could purchase, but he also replaces their money back into their sacks. Well, about that night, when after a day's journey, they realize, hey, he replaced our money. And so now they're fearful that, they see that somebody replaced their money. Somehow it's there. So they're fearful they're going to be charged with stealing. And so they go home and they basically tell their dad, hey, look, they kept one of our brothers, which was Simeon. They kept him in prison. And the guy in charge said, we got to bring back Benjamin and show him that we're not spies, that we actually are brothers from a family with a younger brother. And on top of this, we have the money and we don't know what to do about that. So they're basically telling Jacob, we've got to figure out how to go back and bring Benjamin so that we can get our brother Simeon out of prison. We'll pick up chapter 42, verse 36. And Jacob, their father, said to them, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more. And now you would take Benjamin. All this has come against me." Then Reuben said to his father, "Kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you." But he said, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm should happen to him on the journey that you were able to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to show." Well, eventually, they run out of food. And so they convince Jacob, look, we're all going to die. If we don't go back, we're all going to die. You have to let us bring Benjamin. And so he sends them back, this time with twice the amount of money, in order to pay back from last time, as well as some gifts, and he lets Benjamin go. I want to stop here for a minute. I want you to just think about just something for a minute. Look at how Jacob responded to this. Jacob is so stuck. We talked last week how a few weeks ago, Jacob seemed to step out of his fear and walk in faith, and yet it seems like maybe he did that for a time, and yet his old ways are creeping back. Anyone ever do something for a time that you know God's calling you to, but then you let your old ways seep back in? You step forward, you're living in faith, you're walking in faith, you're involved in study and the word, and you see God working, but then all the distractions of life and all the things that happen, and you're just the bad habits you've picked up, they just seep back in. Well, that's definitely where Jacob seems to be here, right? He's allowed himself to seep back into fear. And he's unwilling to he can't experience God's blessings because he won't let go. So I want to talk for a minute. There's blessing in letting go. Okay? There's blessings when we let go. But we have to be willing to let go. Now think just for a minute about what just happened here. These 9 brothers go back to their dad and they go, hey, Dad, one of your sons is in prison. The only thing we got to do to get him out is show this guy that we have this other brother. And what does Jacob say? No, let him rot in prison. Right? That's basically what he's saying. Let him rot in prison. In fact, look at how he words this. He says, you have bereaved me, my children. Verse 36. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more. He's written him off. He's in prison. That's where he's in. He's dying. He's no more, because there's no way I'm letting you bring my baby. Right? Not my favorite. He's not going with you. Even to the point where one brother puts his own kids on the line in order to save his brother, and he still won't do it. He will not let go. Even this, listen to this. He says, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead. He is the only one left. Wow, Dad, thanks. Right? This feels really good. You know, he's the only one left. What about the 9 of us? I mean, you think they feel like hired hands? You think they feel like, man, our dad's just never going to care about us. So much so that he's willing to let one of us just die in a prison in a foreign land than to risk losing the one he loves. And you see, what Jacob's doing here is he's missing out on his meanwhile. You remember last week we talked about God has a meanwhile? See, God was preparing a meanwhile for 20-something years with Joseph. God was building Joseph up. Oh, this meanwhile of while Jacob was grieving his dead son, meanwhile, God was lifting Joseph up to this place. But Jacob isn't going to experience because he's living in fear. And so many of us are missing out on our meanwhiles that God is working on for us because we decide, I'm going to live in fear. I'm going to try to control the situation. I'm not going to trust that God has a plan. How many of you are missing out on a meanwhile in your life right now because you're unwilling to go and talk to someone that you need to rebuild relationship with? You're unwilling to go and forgive someone because they've hurt you too bad. You're unwilling to step out in faith and trust God with something. Whether maybe God's been calling you to start learning how to have a generous heart, or maybe God's been calling you to go and serve on a mission trip, or maybe God's been calling you to transition a career so that you could use your career more for ministry. Well, I don't know what it is. But you're unwilling to experience the meanwhile God has for you because you're trying to control the situation. So many of us, we miss out on the big meanwhile that God has. And so Jacob is going to miss out on this meanwhile that God's been developing for him. He's going to miss out for a whole nother 2 years. Plus cause more pain and build more fear into his family because of this. Well, he finally lets him go. And when they get there, Joseph has them come, and he kind of has a celebration that they came back, has them have dinner in his chamber, which would have been a big deal. He gets to meet Benjamin, but he still doesn't reveal himself. He holds it together. And after having this big meal and telling them that they can exchange again, he sends them home. Once again, with everything back in their money sacks, but also this time he has someone plant his personal silver cup in their bag. Not in just in any bag, in Benjamin's bag. And then after they've been gone for a little bit, he sends his men to catch up to him. And they accuse them of stealing this cup. And so Joseph says that the punishment is whoever's bag it was in, they have to stay and be a slave. And so he knew it was Benjamin. He knew that would be the case. Now this time, Joseph is testing his brothers. I really believe he's testing them here. Because remember, he knows that Benjamin's the favorite. Remember, he was the favorite, right? He was the favorite, and he saw the way his brothers treated him. I really believe he's saying, hey, are you guys, can we actually even redeem this relationship? Or are you still the same guys? Are you going to do the same thing? Because he's given a situation where they could have said, oh, you found that in Benjamin's bag? Oh, that sucks, Benjamin. We'll see you. Right? He gives them that situation. Right? But that's not what they do. They step up to the occasion. They plead for Joseph. Don't keep Benjamin. Whatever you do, don't keep Benjamin. Look at verse 33 and 34. This is Judah speaking. Judah says this in verse 33 and 34. He says, please let your servant, meaning himself, remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see that evil would find my father. Now think about this for a second. Judah is the one that sold him. Judah was the one that had the idea, hey, let's just make a little money off of bro, and we'll sell him into slavery rather than kill him. And now, rather than let Benjamin stay, he's saying, no, it's got to be me. I can't do that again. That did not work out. That has caused me too much grief, too much pain to watch what it's done to my father. My father may never love me the way I would like him to love me, but I'm not going to do that again. So he steps up. And think about this for a second. Listen to some of the words they use to plead for Benjamin's life. This is in verse 20 through 22. I know I'm jumping back. But they say this. They go, we have a father, an old man, and a young brother, the child of his old age. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children. And his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me, and I may set my eyes on him. And we said to my Lord, the boy cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. I just think it's interesting because you can almost hear in these words that they don't want their father to go through that. And I got to say, I got to give these guys credit at this point. I get they've done some bad stuff, but I got to give them credit. Dad has written them off. Dad has said, you guys are never going to be nothing compared to these two. These two are my favorites. Dad has treated their moms probably not very well. But they're not willing to do something that they know would bring evil on their dad. They've grown. You know, and it's easy to go, they're older. So what? There's things I'm older in that I'm still just as immature in. Right? And there's people I've known that I think, man, I would hope they would get over that. I'd hope they get past that. And they never get past it. They seem to have grown here. I mean, think about it. These men have every reason to be wounded. Probably more than any man I've ever known. Because, and yet they're saying, take one of us, because the son that our father loves, the way we wish he would love us, it would kill him if you take him. He's our dad, and we love him. So Joseph, at this point, he can't put on this facade any longer, and he reveals himself. Look at verse 45. Chapter 45, verse 4 through 15. It says this. So Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me, please. And they came near. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold to Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me here before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God has sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, the Lord and Lord of all his house, and ruler over all his land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me. You and your children and your children's children and your flocks and your herds and all that you have. There I will provide for you. For there are yet 5 years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have do not come to poverty. And now your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth that speaks to you. You must tell my father of all my honor in Egypt and of all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father down. Then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. After that, his brothers talked to them. So his brothers, he just reveals this all to them. And so his brothers talked to him for a while. And then after that, Joseph lets the Pharaoh know about this. Pharaoh gets behind it, and Pharaoh tells him to bring his whole family. So they go, and they go up to get his brother. We're chapter 45, verse 28, we'll pick up. Verse 25, we pick up in. It says, so they went up to Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob. And they told him, Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt. And his heart became numb, for he did not believe them. And when they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is alive. I will go and see him before I die. And then in chapter 46, they end back down in in Egypt. Look at chapter 46, verse 1. It says, so Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. And he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. And then verse 25 through 27 is an accounting of all the people of Jacob's family that he brings. Not all the people that they would account for, including their servants, but all his people. That's the 27. And we end in 28 through 30. It says, he had sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to show the way before him in Goshen. And they came into the land of Goshen. Then Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to meet Israel, his father, in Goshen. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen your face and I know that you are still alive. All right, we're going to stop the story there. But I want to bring out one major point. I mean, if anyone had the right to say no to forgiveness, it would be Joseph. Right? If anyone had the right to say, man, these guys are dead to me, it would have been Joseph. And he didn't do it. He chose to show forgiveness. Now let me ask them, you think he forgave them because he was just like, man, I need to forgive you. I just miss you guys so much, and I love you, and you guys, we had such a great relationship, and I want that back? No. Do you think he just got to this place after 22 years where all of a sudden he just was like, oh, I forgive them? I don't think so. You know why? Because our feelings about people always are going one way or the other if we have a real relationship with any kind with them. We either are growing in our acceptance, love, and forgiveness of them, or we're growing in our distrust, disdain, hate for them. And we get to choose how we deal with that. Had Joseph started 22 years ago, going, man, I can't believe my brothers. I hate them. And started, you get the daydreams. You ever get the daydreams? You're doing something and you have a dislike for someone, and it starts off with, They just fall over on their bike or whatever, right? But then it's like, eventually it's like, hopefully the cops come and arrest them someday and a piano falls on them, right? And so had they started there, had he started at a point where it's like, you know what? I'm going to hold this anger. And I'm not going to forgive them. I'm going to let that anger grow. Man, can you imagine how much hate there would have been in his heart for his brothers now at 22 years later? See, I think this forgiveness started somewhere in that 22-year period a long time ago. Maybe not the first year even. Maybe for a while it was, first couple years even. But somewhere Joseph made the choice to forgive them. It wasn't because he had these warm, fuzzy feelings about them. It was because he made a choice. And see, the key is in how he says this to his brothers. What do you hear? You see a couple times through this passage, and even parts I didn't read, where he basically is saying, God did this. God had a plan. And I trusted that God had a plan in all of this. In one place he says, what you did for evil, God did for good. You might have done it for evil, but God's used it. And Joseph made a decision to trust that God was in all of this. And we see this through his 20-something years. Through his 20-something years in Egypt, we see that he continually made the decision to trust that God was in it. I don't know your story. My guess is every one of us in this room, you might have, we all get these things where we go, man, if you knew what happened to me. But guess what? You start turning around and we had a time of sharing right now and you guys would all be open and actually share your darkest things, the meanest cuts, the biggest stabs that people put in your back. I guarantee you we'd all have some pretty rough stories. The question is, what are you going to choose to do with it? Are you going to choose to hold that and let that control you, or are you going to release it to God? I had some people that I was in ministry with years back, about 20-something years ago, that stabbed me in the back in ways that I didn't ever think I'd get over. Just did horrible things that, I still, like, there's no way I could say, oh, you got to, there was two sides to every story. Took me years to forgive it. But over time, I had to get to a place and go, you know what? If those things hadn't happened, I wouldn't be where I'm at. I would have probably stayed in a more comfortable position. I would have just done what seemed like that right path based on everything going well. And I was able to get to a place and say, God, I don't know why I had to go through that, but I trust that it was what you wanted. So what I want to do today is just real quick, close out with talking about what biblical forgiveness is. So let's say, what is biblical forgiveness? Well, to talk about what it is, let me start with what it's not. Because I think a lot of people are unwilling to forgive because they have this pie in the sky, fairyland idea about what forgiveness is. Okay, first of all, forgiveness is not spiritual amnesia. What do I mean by that? Well, you just got to forgive and forget. No, you don't. You got to forgive. The Bible never calls you to forget because God knows, God's not stupid. He knows you can't forget. If someone's done really hard things to you, you're not going to forget that. Now, your mind might move it out of your brain, but God's not expecting you to forget the horrible things that people have done to you. You're not required to just receive this amnesia. Second thing, it's not. Forgiveness is not removal of consequences. Just because someone forgives you and just because you forgive someone doesn't mean that there aren't still consequences for their actions. Right? Just you can still expect them to have to win back your trust. You can still expect them to have to suffer the consequence. Most of the time when my kids do something wrong, I've forgiven them within a few minutes. Guess what? Consequences are still there. I'm not mad, but you're still going to do the consequences, right? You're still going to learn that when you do something wrong, there's going to be a consequence to it. There's a country singer, Cody Johnson. He has a song on an album he released last year called "Jesus Loves You," and not really saying this is the most appropriate, but I like the concept. It's about a guy breaks into his house and he ends up in prison. And Cody goes to visit him. And the whole song, he shares the gospel with the guy in prison. But one of the lines is, he says, Jesus loves you. All it takes is faith. But if you come near my family again, you're going to meet him face to face. There's consequences. You mess with my family, I promise you, you're going to suffer a consequence. I'll forgive you, but I'm not going to let you not have a consequence, right? Okay, immediate trust. Immediate trust. Biblical forgiveness is not immediate trust. It takes time to earn trust back. A friend of mine cheated on his wife for a couple years. And when he came clean on it, he really wanted to restore the marriage, and he's praying she would want to, and she did. But restoring the marriage didn't mean like, hey, we're just good. No, it meant, hey, for a year, you're going to live in a separate apartment, and you're going to date me, and you're not going to ever, if I catch you even looking at another woman, that year's over. And in another year, you can move in the house and you're going to sleep in another bed. And I'll tell you anytime I maybe feel like our marriage being somewhat normal during that year. And after that year, we'll talk. I thought that was a great plan on her part. I really did. I'm like, yeah, no, make him earn it. He needs to earn it. He needs to show, does he really want it? And, in counseling, the whole deal, the whole thing. But it wasn't just like, oh, everything's fine. Because no, it's not. Immediate trust doesn't just happen. And then finally, biblical forgiveness does not mean you need to be a doormat. It does not mean you need to put yourself in a position where the person can continue to hurt you over and over and over again. My dad was a drug addict. And when he was using, he knew flat out, hey, if you're using, and if I know you're using, you are not allowed in my door. If you come to my door and I can tell you've been using in any way, shape, or form, or you've been in a pattern of using, you're not getting in my house. Why? Because I'm not subjecting my family to that. Do I love you? Do I forgive you? Absolutely, but I'm not gonna put you in a position where you continue to hurt my family. That's not gonna happen. So biblical forgiveness is not those things. We have to I think we get this idea that it just means all these, like, everything just washes right away. Yeah, with Jesus it does. His forgiveness does that. But guess who's not Jesus? Any one of us, right? Okay, so real quick, let me just close with this. What is it then? Biblical forgiveness, I think, is defined really well in Romans chapter 12, 17 through 21. It says this, it says, repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, as far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Now, real quick, a guy named Larry Osborne, pastor I really admire, he takes that verse and he defines forgiveness with these two statements. Forgiveness is refusing to seek revenge or be consumed by the past injustice. Refusing to seek revenge or be consumed by a past injustice. See, hear that verse? It says, hey, you're not the one to seek revenge. Let God seek revenge. Let God pay him back. Let God decide what needs to be paid back and what doesn't. Because guess what? If God paid you back for everything you did wrong, it might not be a good thing for you either, right? So just trust it to God. And don't be consumed. Don't give the people free rent in your head. You're the one that's suffering when you let someone hold that. And then the second thing is Forgiveness is a decision that becomes a feeling. Forgiveness is a decision that becomes a feeling. See, two things about that verse there. One, what does he say is going to happen when you do kind things to people? He says it's like heaping burning coals on their head. Right? It's gonna kind of start to sting when they go, man, no matter what I do to this person, they keep showing love. And eventually that person starts to either, it causes them misery if they want to stay miserable, or that misery kind of now makes them think about, man, what could I do different? What could I change about myself? Because something about this person is different. But second, in this idea that forgiveness is a decision that becomes a feeling, I understand there are tough things to forgive. Every one of us in here has some tough things to forgive. Maybe you have parents who were super harsh on you. Maybe even abusive. Maybe you had an ex who cheated on you and just destroyed all trust, or they just drug your name and your life through the mud. Maybe you have a business partner that took everything. Maybe you gave your life to a position, a job, and that boss just used you. Maybe it was at a church. Maybe a pastor was spiritually abusive to you. Maybe a group of people in a church, you thought you were a part, they welcomed you in, and then they just they treated you badly when you were in a tough time in life. I don't know what it is. But here's the deal. I don't think forgiveness is an option. I don't think it's an option. I think it's a requirement. If you want to say you're a Christ follower, it's a requirement for us to really experience what God has for us. Why? Because what does Jesus say when he talks about how to pray? He says, you should pray, Lord, forgive me my debts as I forgive those who have sinned against me. Forgive me my sins as I forgive those who have sinned against me. Ooh, that's scary. If I'm going to ask God to forgive me the way I forgive other people, man, I better really put that into practice. See, he's saying this isn't an option. This is a requirement on us. And it's a decision. See, here's the other problem. People think we should forgive when we feel like it. If my wife and I only forgave each other when we felt like it, their marriage would have been over years ago. We forgive each other because we know that's the only way it really continues to build relationship. And we might not feel like it, but we're going to make that decision. And we're going to keep making that decision. And guess what happens after time of making those decisions? We start to feel like it a little bit. We start to get the feelings grow after we make the decision. See, I think one of the biggest lies our country tells people right now is that you're a hypocrite if you act on love or forgiveness if you don't feel it. That you have to be true to your feelings. No, you don't. You do not have to be true to your feelings. Show me one place in the Bible that tells you to be true to your feelings. Your feelings are lying to you all day, every day. You have to be true to the truth is what you have to be true to. And the truth says you need to forgive. And the truth says that when you forgive, it will set you free. But if you allow your feelings to control you, guess where you get to live? You don't get to live in faith. You will live in fear. You're not hypocritical when you make the choice to forgive even when you don't feel like it. That's when you're being godly. That's when you're being truly Christ-like. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I ask that you would give us a heart of forgiveness. God, help us to truly learn what it means to forgive one another, to experience forgiveness with one another the way we experience it from you. God, help us to seek to be a little more Christ-like by just showing that forgiveness and a little bit more the way you do. God, I know there's people in here with huge wounds, huge hurts, and we wonder, how can we ever forgive? God, I pray that we would see that you have a plan, that we can trust you in all things, that you've been working through all this, and that you have a meanwhile prepared for us if we will just let go. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.